Tonight we have Dr. Jennifer Herricks here. She is the founder of Louisiana Families for Vaccines and their advocacy director, the advocacy director rather for Safe Communities Coalition. She earned a PhD in microbiology and molecular genetics from the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston and completed a postdoctoral fellowship in global health policy with a focus on infectious disease at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. During her postdoctoral work, she saw how well-organized, well-funded anti-vaccine activists can shift public policies that directly affect public health. So since then, she's been passionate about protecting public health through vaccine advocacy and empowering families and policymakers to make informed decisions with accurate information. In 2022, Jennifer founded Louisiana Families for Vaccines, a grassroots network of local advocates that works closely with a diverse set of community partners to combat vaccine information, educate about the value of policy based in science, and support legislation that champions public health. Rebecca Christensen is the founder and campaign director of Safe Communities Coalition and Action Fund. Becky is a former surgical care nurse from Colorado's western, sorry, I have seeing issues, slope. A lifelong Coloradan, Becky was in the nursing profession for 20 years, starting as a nurse's aide and working her way to being a registered nurse and an operating room coordinator. And in 2014, she harnessed her volunteer passion for politics and turned it into a new career. She since run several political campaigns and emerged as one of Colorado's most respected progressive political operatives. In addition, she worked at the state legislature as an aide with key expertise in public health policy. After seeing members of the anti-vaccine movement derail a number of key policy goals, Becky decided to pivot to take on anti-vaxxers directly. She founded Safe Communities, an organization with a simple goal: strengthen public health and save lives. Jennifer joined Safe Communities Coalition as advocacy director in 2024 and works with other Families for Vaccine state chapters across the country to develop effective strategies that elevate the voices of the pro-vaccine majority and push back against the anti-vaccine policies that threaten public health. So with that, ladies, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us this evening. So we'll start by some really fun pictures of collectively our 9 state chapter lobby days that we've taken part in the last year. And just want to start it off with that because at the end of the day, advocacy days and going to the Capitol, you're part of a community and it really is fun at the end of the day. So I just want to start off by reminding everybody a little bit about who we are as Safe Communities Coalition, talk about why it's important to have an advocacy day or what your reasons would be, and then go kind of into the planning and the details and just kind of the nitty-gritty of how it's done. So just as a reminder, we're a 501c4, which by tax status means that we can work politically. We take everyday people, the silent pro-vaccine majority, to advocate for health and safety. We're a bipartisan political force opposing the anti-vaccine agenda in state houses across the country. So you see there we've got our 9 state chapters. And the reason we're here doing this is because vaccines are political. They are on our ballot this year. They had been political for a few years before the pandemic, and the pandemic just really accelerated their goals and their fundraising. And they've gotten much more sophisticated and they're much more in headlines now. And these are the anti-vaccine organizations. So if you think about that map where we had 9 of ours, this is, and not to say that there aren't other pro-vaccine organizations, there certainly are, but this is where you can see there is an anti-vaccine organization in every single state in the country, sometimes more than one. And just to briefly review, these are the kind of the 5 main national anti-vaccine organizations that very much increased their fundraising from 2019 to 2022. So you're looking here collectively at about $50 million in fundraising that they brought in 2022. They work in elections, they work in litigation, they work in state legislation, and they're organized and they all work together. They work hand in hand. They have each other on their podcasts. They share information, model legislation with each other. So they're very organized and very sophisticated. Just to show you just kind of the progression of anti-vaccine bills introduced. So public health policy is largely determined on a state level. That's by design, because when they were putting our country together, it was possible that the king could shut down an area, call it a quarantine when it really wasn't, to shut down commerce, to punish somebody. So they left it up to the states to determine their policies. And as you can see, we had a drastic increase in anti-vaccine legislation from 2018, where we saw a bill here and there, to 2022, where we had 1,500. And now in 2024, we have less. We're down to about 500. But these are much sneakier. They have to do with blood donations and agriculture, and foster care has been a big topic. So really finding out where they can find the weak links to get this legislation through. So after that, I'm going to go to Jennifer now to start here.
Thanks, Becky. Okay, so Becky kind of outlined for you guys the main issue that we focus on. So we're going to look at our days of advocacy through this lens. But of course, this can apply to all kinds of different issues. So why should you think about organizing or participating in a day of advocacy? Sometimes they're called lobby days, or a day on the Hill. But really, this gives you an opportunity, not just you, your group, your organization, grassroots advocates, to come in and directly engage lawmakers, right? And to have those conversations about the legislation that's moving through the process. So you have that opportunity to advocate for specific issues in person. And it's extremely effective when lawmakers can hear from their constituents in person. They know that somebody has made the drive out there to see them that day. And it's really great when you can do it as a group. It's not as intimidating. If you're a shyer person, you can hang out with the t-shirt on while somebody else takes the lead with all of the talking points. It's a great opportunity also for organizations and individuals to build relationships with legislators and also with the legislative staff. Showing up is always, you've got your signs or whatever. We'll talk about specifics in each different state house, but it demonstrates a strength of support for your cause. That might be t-shirts, that might be, tables in the rotunda, depending on how your state house works. And it allows for this very focused and coordinated effort to influence decisions. And so one example will be from our first lobby day as Louisiana Families for Vaccines. We had that year, there was 40 pieces of anti-vaccine legislation in Louisiana alone. And we were there towards the end of session. So, they were trying to push the final bills through the process. And a group of us walked into a committee when they were having a hearing on a bill that we were following, an anti-vaccine bill. And the plan in this committee from people who had been sitting there was they were about to just they were going to take a vote. They were going to let the legislation go through without having anyone speak. And then they saw us come in with our t-shirts. And again, laws are different state to state. But in Louisiana, if you want to speak on a bill as an individual, as a citizen, you have that right. So once we walked in with all the t-shirts on, the chair stopped and he said, you know what, we're going to have to give people a chance to speak. Let's hear the proponents and let's hear the opponents. And that single delay delayed that piece of legislation to where it didn't have time to cross over and finish the legislative process. So effectively, just walking into the room, we killed the bill. So you can make a really big impact. And I know Becky has a story recently about having t-shirts on in a committee room.
Yeah, in Oregon, we had really, of course, we always have cute t-shirts, but on the back of our t-shirts, it says vaccine hero. And everybody went into a committee. There was no bill we were hearing. We were just, showing advocates what a committee process looks like. So we took everybody in, and I came in a few minutes after them when they were already seated. And just the impact of seeing vaccine hero rows of these t-shirts. It was just so impressive. And then the bill was about Paxlovid, pharmacists being able to give Paxlovid. And it confused one of the lawmakers so much, he stopped and asked the bill proponent, or asked the bill sponsor, what does this have to do with vaccines? And they're like, nothing. He's like, well, what are the vaccine people doing here? And so they took notice. I mean, they see that when you're in there with those kinds of numbers. So that's really, really exciting. And I do want to just reiterate with building relationship, legislative staff and interns are incredibly important. They are your future lawmakers and community leaders. And so you're giving them an impression of, the lawmaker's busy. Can I meet with you? And make sure that they're valued. If you're giving out goodies, that they're fed, and because they matter. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to get something done and they like you, they're the ones that are going to make sure that that gets in front of the lawmaker. Julie's nodding because I know she's been a legislative aide. And when people are nice to you, you're more likely to make sure that message is at the top of the pile. So so it's incredibly important that we, take meetings with them and do things like that when we're in there, because they'll be our friends.
Yeah. And to that point, whether we go in and we're talking to a legislative aide or lawmaker themselves, we have always operated under we are going in with positivity, even if we're fighting bills, right? We want to stop bad legislation. We want to still come in with that positive message and encouraging the lawmakers to do what we want them to do. We've had really great open dialogue with some legislators that we consider to be anti-vaccine. But it's great to start building that relationship so that you can have that dialogue. We don't go in there confrontationally, because that can sometimes just close the door, and you don't want to do that. So that's our recommendation, is go in as positively as you can. And you see this example here from a recent lobby day that Becky did in Colorado, that starts off with a thank you note to legislators. And we'll go over, Becky, if you want to move to the next slide, because we'll eventually get to a slide where we look at some specific materials that you might want to consider. So if you're thinking of organizing a lobby day, we highly recommend looking into partnerships. So you saw that letter on the previous slide. It had multiple organizations on it. Here in this picture, this was from our first lobby day in Louisiana. So you see Ashley in the middle. She's Louisiana Families for Vaccines, but with the Louisiana chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So finding those organizations, no matter what your issue is, that can align on the issue that is important to you. And you can attend their lobby days, and you can invite them to help you host a lobby day if it is your first time. So in Louisiana, we actually partnered with the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. So they're a social justice organization, but they were super active during the COVID-19 outbreak. After the vaccine came out, they partnered with our Department of Health to get people on the ground and go into vulnerable communities, specifically marginalized communities. And they were there to build trust between the people in those communities and the Department of Health to get vaccines in arms. And so this was an important issue for them. They were familiar already with the process of running a lobby day at the Capitol, because they do it every year. So it was fantastic for us to partner with them, and they can help walk us through all the steps and processes that were specific to Louisiana that we needed to know. So yeah, and then determine, how involved are you going to be? Do you just want to be a participant in a lobby day, or do you want to be the organization who is leading the lobby day? And then I guess the last point is people show up for you when you show up for them. So in that partnership role, making sure that you're supporting your partners so that they can be there to support you. Okay.
So this is plans are nothing and planning is everything. I think this was Dwight Eisenhower. And I really wanted to point this out with a lobby day or an advocacy day, because the legislature is a very hectic place, and they very rarely stick to a schedule. And so you can plan all you want, but things are going to go differently, than what you expected. And so you just have to be ready to roll with it. Now, if you have this as planned out and dialed in as you possibly can, it is much easier to pivot when the moment comes, because it will. They're a hectic building. There's, school children running around on tours, and committee meetings run late, and a lot of different things happen in a legislative day in these short sessions. So just that's what I think of. I think if I'm micromanaging a lobby day, I'm doing my job, because I'm going to show up and somebody's going to have my spot, or something's going to happen that I'm going to have to roll with. So don't you think, Jen?
Absolutely. Yes. Anything can happen. You can have all the scheduled meetings. Some of those are going to fall through, but you can also make impromptu meetings as well. So it's just always have to be flexible and know what your options are. Okay. So organizing your lobby day, it's really, really important to know your state's rules. And that's where, if this is your first time participating or organizing a lobby day, having those partners that have already done that and been there is really, really great. So certain things that you might want to think about is, can you feed lawmakers? And this is different in different states. So in some states that SAFE works in, we can provide a full breakfast or a lunch, but in other states, as you see here, what we used in Maine was cookies, and providing cookies. So if you're going to consider giving any kind of gifts, are there gift limits? What are your specific lobbying laws? Do you have to reserve spaces? So I can give you an example from Louisiana talking about reserving spaces and press conferences. So in Louisiana, the Capitol, we have the front outside, which is the Capitol steps. And then we have two like open air areas on either side of the Capitol. And then in the inside of the rotunda. And so these are all of the like public spaces, but individuals and organizations can actually reserve these spaces. So you have to know, how far ahead of time do you need to reserve this space? And then what is the process? So a lot of states, you can reserve a year in advance. In Louisiana, it's every year on January 1st is when they open up reservations, and everybody who wants to do a lobby day has their email scheduled to go out at 12 a.m. on January 1st so that they can get their email as close to the top of the pile as they can, so they can get their spot and their day that they are looking to have. So think about branded materials. What kind of branded materials can you have? In Colorado, if you're going to go onto the Senate or House chambers, you can't have branded clothing, right? So you can't have an organization written on your clothes, right? Becky, and that was your situation recently in Colorado?
Yep.
And people who might be able to help. So your senator or your state rep should be able to help you. If, that relationship just isn't working right now, the majority leader or the speaker of the House is another person that you can go to for specific questions and guidance when you're planning the lobby day and making sure that you're doing everything at the right time and in the right way.
Yeah, the branded materials was a surprise to me, and I worked in that building. I didn't know that we couldn't wear our t-shirts. Luckily, we all had jackets because it was cool that morning, so we're just able to put our jackets on. But again, that's another example of kind of going with the flow. And as far as, if you can feed people and your budget allows, even if it's just cookies and coffee or something, I highly recommend it. It is the great equalizer food. It brings everyone together. When I worked at the Colorado State House, I ate some really delicious oil and gas breakfast burritos. And we find that our most anti-vax lawmakers still come over to our table and get lunch. And we keep it very nice and friendly, and thank them for coming by. So it is a great equalizer if you can do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's hard for people to say no to a cookie when they're walking by. Okay. Oh, I don't see that last image coming up. I don't know if anybody else can see it, but in any case, framing the issue. So these are events that we've done in different states. So depending on your particular issue and kind of the culture around your state, you know, you can pick a theme for your event. So in Oregon, it's Will You Be a Vaccine Hero, which I think is just adorable. In Louisiana, the one that we've used for the past several years is Let's Break Free from Preventable Disease. And in Colorado, they did an appreciation breakfast. So there's different ways you can think about hosting and organizing around a theme.
Yeah, we really didn't have any bad legislation in Colorado or any good legislation, so we just made it a thank you. Thanks for being here. And with 40 advocates, the legislators got the notice that there's a pro-vaccine group out here that's going to be keeping an eye on things. So
yeah, I want to emphasize that point, is that if there's an issue you're passionate about, even if your legislatures aren't addressing it with specific bills, it's always good to go to the Capitol to let them know that, you know, you're there and there is a group of people that care about this issue enough to come to the Capitol and organize Lobby Day. Even if it's just a small group of people, they understand that it is difficult to organize people and to get them to a lot of times drive a good distance to come to the Capitol for a Lobby Day. So it does make an impact, just to let them know that if the issue comes up, they're going to think about you. So then planning more of the specific parts of your Lobby Day. So we like to do ahead of time a logistics webinar. So we're doing ours tomorrow for Louisiana, because we're hosting a Lobby Day on Monday. So we're going to take Friday. Folks that haven't been to a Lobby Day before, are not as familiar with the state capitol. This is kind of a short opportunity to show them, you know, make sure they know how to get to the Capitol. Where do they park? Where are the accessible entrances? Where are we meeting? How are you going to find us? All of those logistical components, and give them a chance to ask questions. And it's also a good opportunity to briefly frame the issue for them, because obviously, you know, they care about the issue. They're coming to this virtual training, but it's a good chance for you, you know, to drive home, like, you showing up is really, really important. You'll want to think about specific materials. So what we do is we build a packet of materials that is specific for our advocates. Gives them information, kind of general vaccine related information, and information on the bills that we're following, as well as talking points about those bills. And the general information is things that they can use when they're talking to their legislators. Hey, did you know that the measles vaccination rate in our parish is 85%, or, you know, for example, and it gives them something to talk about. We go over talking with legislators, right? Keep it short, keep it respectful. Let them know if you are a constituent, because that's really important. And always, you know, in the vein of being respectful, addressing lawmakers by their title. So that's something that we kind of walk our advocates through to make sure that we have all the proper decorum. Making sure you have an agenda for the day. Louisiana, we make a rough agenda, but the day, you know, you don't know sometimes, different states are different, but in Louisiana, sometimes we have days notice before a committee meeting or a bill goes to the floor and things like that. So in terms of specifically where we're going to be, as Becky said, we always have to be flexible, and bills can come onto an agenda at the last minute or drop off at the last minute. So always being flexible, but having kind of a structure that you expect to go with during your day. Again, thinking about those partnerships, one thing we do in Louisiana, we reserve the entire rotunda for our day, and we get all of our community partners. We offer them all a chance to have a table in the rotunda. So our rotunda holds 13 tables, and we do kind of a rotunda takeover where everyone can come in and provide information to legislators on vaccines. And it's great because they're hearing about it, not just from Louisiana Families for Vaccines, but from local FQHCs and from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and from the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, and just a bunch of different voices all coming together. And I think I mentioned this already, but making sure, everyone is aware of accessibility and language accommodations before they get to the Capitol, so that everyone feels comfortable.
Yeah, and I think that, going over this ahead of time kind of takes some of that, for somebody that hasn't gone to the Capitol before and ever done something like this. It takes some of the mystery out of it for them, lets them know that we're prepared and we're not just throwing them out there into a Capitol to talk to legislators. And I always like to tell people, when it comes to addressing lawmakers, even if your kids play soccer together or something, when we're in the building, you use their title, just because some people can get real picky about it, and we certainly don't ever want to be a force that is being offensive. So I just threw this in here as an example of, like, this is the one I just did for Colorado. Just again, an example of how much I micromanaged it, marking the, I marked on the maps, the accessible entrances, where we're going to be when, and made sure that they had that map before the day of action.
Okay, and so looking a little bit more at the materials that we prepared to give you some ideas of the kinds of things that you might want to do for an advocacy day, no matter what your issues are. So as I said, we build packets for our advocates. We also build specific packets that we share with lawmakers. And it's important, anything you want to share with lawmakers, like I said, make sure you know what the lobbying laws are. And then make sure you know the best way to get your materials into the hands of either specific lawmakers, if you have specific targets, or in our case, we share our materials with every single lawmaker in the building. And that's going to differ by different states. Some states, the best thing to do is put it in their mailbox. In our state, we can go through the speaker's office and have everything placed on their desk. And so it just depends. In Tennessee, we went office to office and dropped off materials at each office. And so if you have to do that, depending on the number of legislators that you have, you want to make sure you have enough manpower to be able to get that done. But it's great because I love that when you walk in to drop something off in the office, you get to talk to either the legislator or the legislative aide that is there. And you can briefly tell them about why you're there, give your 5-minute little talk. And it's wonderful to have that person-to-person connection. So these are examples of the folders that we build. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, we also make postcards where people can write. So either after they talk to their legislator or even before, if they want to just write their legislator a note, letting them know, hey, I came to the Capitol on this day. I'm your constituent. I really care passionately about this issue. And, in our case, I hope you vote with the science, kind of messaging on that. And again, knowing how are you going to leave that with lawmakers? If you don't have a meeting with them or you don't see them in the Capitol, what's the best way to collect those postcards? But those handwritten notes really go a long way. And then in the picture top middle right, you can see an advocate talking with a legislator who is showing them a booklet that we made. So we made a booklet of district-specific immunization data. And so, for instance, at this lunch, anyone who walked in, any legislator who walked in, you could open that booklet, flip to the page that was specific to their district, and talk to them specifically about their district. And they love talking about their districts and things that are important for their districts. So whether they were doing good on immunization rates or whether they were behind, it helped open the door to a conversation. So when you're creating, thinking about what kind of materials you're going to create, what kind of materials are going to help open the door to that conversation and get your talking points across.
Yeah, and to reiterate what Jen said, every state's a little bit different. Oregon, we were able to set meetings with lawmakers. We can do the same thing in Tennessee. Some states are just too hectic to even try, but you can set a meeting with the legislative staff. It's all just a little bit different, but I mean, you can see in Oregon, we delivered them, and in the meetings, we're able to sit down and go over that packet and talk with them specifically about that information, about, you know, how Oregon measures up against measles. It's not good, by the way. And, you know, just specifically their district, whether their immunization rates are good or bad. Yeah, I think that's it. One thing I didn't mention in the preparing, if your budget allows, or if you have a volunteer, it is nice to have a photographer. If your organization fundraises or depends on donors, or, you know, wants to use these photos to get an even bigger group next year, some really good photos are really important, and you can use them for a while. So yeah. And it's hard to be the one in there organizing it and trying to take photos, and you're going to forget. So if you can have somebody designated or a photographer with you, it's very helpful. Yeah, and to the postcards are a nice activity in South Dakota. We sat down and wrote them out in the morning, and it was a really good time to think through our talking points for the day before we met the lawmakers. So, you know, what is it you would like to say about South Dakota immunization rates? Or I think we had a whole bunch of measles outbreaks right at that time. So I think we all wrote them about that. But that got them all ready to do that. So it's also a tool that you can use to get folks ready with what they want to say for the day.
Okay, well, thanks you everybody for coming and sharing a couple hours with us. And thank you, Jennifer and Becky, for all that you do. And make sure that you go to our website, redwine.blue, to look up for future events for the ones that we talked about. And we'll see you guys next week.